New York Times has this headline. The headline is, "This is not the way to help depressed teenagers." It says, Dr. Saxby is a clinical psychologist and professor of psychology at the University of Southern California. Ever since the pandemic, when rates of teenage suicide, anxiety, and depression spiked, policymakers around the world have pushed to make mental health resources more broadly available to young people through programming in schools and on social media platforms. The strategy is well-intentioned. Traditional therapy can be expensive and time-consuming. Access can be limited. By contrast, large-scale light-touch interventions, TikTok offerings from Harvard School of Public Health, grief coping workshops in junior high, aim to reach young people where they are and at relatively low cost. But there's now reason to think that this approach is risky. Recent studies have found that several of these programs not only failed to help young people, they also made their mental health problems worse. Understanding why these efforts backfired can shed light on how society can and can't help teenagers who are suffering from depression and anxiety. Consider a social-emotional skills training school program called WISE Teens, led by clinical psychologists in training. It consists of 8 weekly hour-long classroom sessions in which students learn to...
I'm just letting Matt Walsh provide the context because this is the article that he's going to be responding to, so I'll probably also be drawing from it. So I'm just kind of letting him go through everything.
To manage their emotions with the help of tools and principles drawn from cognitive behavior therapy and Zen Buddhism. Last month, the journal Behavior Research and Therapy published a study of about 1,000 Australian teenagers who were observed from 2017 to 2018. One group participated in WISE Teens, another group participated in standard health class curriculum. And just to summarize, it turns out that the students who were in this kind of therapeutic environment fared worse. And then there are other examples that they bring forth of students who are in these kind of therapeutic programs meant to help them cope with anxiety and depression, but it actually makes them worse. Why is that happening? Well, there's a few theories that are put forward. It says, first, by focusing teenagers' attention on mental health issues, these interventions may have unwittingly exacerbated their problems. Lucy Folks, an Oxford psychologist, calls this phenomenon prevalence inflation. When greater awareness of mental illness leads people to talk of normal life struggles in terms of symptoms and diagnoses, these sorts of labels begin to dictate how people view themselves in ways that can become self-fulfilling. Teenagers who are still developing their identities are especially prone to take psychological labels to heart. Instead of saying, I am nervous about X, a teenager might say, I can't do X because I have anxiety. A reframing that research shows undermines resilience by encouraging people to view everyday challenges as insurmountable. Anyway.
My personal observation, and obviously I am no psychiatrist by any stretch of the imagination, no psychologist. I have no formalized training in any sort of mental health profession, and my opinions should be taken as that of a layman. But in my personal experience, there's some truth to what was said there. The truth to what was said there is that there are instances, and I don't think it's exclusive to teenagers, but there are people who are constantly using mental health diagnoses to make excuses for why they can't do things. But I think in a lot of instances, the stuff that they're making excuses not to do is stuff that they already naturally don't want to do anyway. It's just like, you know, and you give a person sort of an out and they're going to try to use it. And if it's not mental health, it's going to be religiosity or it's going to be some other thing. You know, people are always going to grasp at like, ooh, this might be my ticket to not have to do the thing I don't want to do. And, you know, mental health is one of the things they might use for that. You could easily use culture or religion or tradition or whatever the hell else you could cook up with. You know, I'm a master at getting out of shit, okay? Like, I know how to fucking avoid work I don't want to do. And, you know, I'm sure a lot of people in my audience are the same way. You know how to avoid things you don't really want to deal with. And, you know, mental health can be one of those things you can use to deal with that. And, you know, you shouldn't really do that because it trivializes mental health conditions. It's one of the reasons why I try not to use my ADHD diagnosis to blame stuff on my ADHD. Now, there are things that my ADHD might make more difficult, but I should never resort to, I can't do this because I have ADHD. It might make certain things more challenging, but it's not making anything that anyone else could do impossible for me to do. Now, that being said, there are obviously instances where it is impossible for a person to function normally. Usually that's pretty extreme cases like like a schizophrenic or something. One of the things that I always tell people who are depressed, because I dealt with depression pretty severely in my, younger years. And, some people come to me and ask about depression. And I always tell them, you just got to do stuff. The stuff you don't want to do, you have to force yourself to do, because you'll feel better once you do it. When you stop putting that thing off and you actually delve into it, you're going to feel better than you do now. And, I just can't, I just got no motivation. And it's like, I know. But you have to learn to not rely on motivation, because the thing about motivation is wildly inconsistent. And, you got to constantly fight to do the things that you're not motivated to do just because they're necessary. And I say this as someone who struggles with this constantly to this day. I've not mastered this by any stretch of the imagination. There are still times when I don't do the things that I know I should do. I put off working on my book, Sex About Uprising, for months and months at a time, even though I would think about it every single day. I'd be like, man, I should probably try to write a chapter, try to put down some words to paper. And, I just like, I just don't have the motivation. And I tell myself, it can't be about motivation. You just got to do it. You just got to do it. You just got to do it. And that battle would happen, every day. Be like, but you got to have the struggle. You can't just dismiss it. You can't just say, like, I give up, because that's not going to make you less depressed and anxious. That's going to make you more depressed and anxious. So I think there is some truth to what's being said in this article. I agree with some of the stuff said there. I don't know what Matt Walsh's spin is going to be. Maybe he'll actually have a more nuanced opinion on this, and I'll actually walk away from this saying, hey, I agree with Matt Walsh. But that's my opinion. I put it forth. Now let's listen to what he has to say about it. A lot of people have asked me, hey, where do you do your live streams? And the answer to that is that I do live streams called Abandon Hope every Sunday on the Pessimist Productions Patreon. That is linked down below. There is all sorts of other stuff on that Patreon as well. It is about $7 a month, and I think that we offer a pretty generous amount of content in exchange for that membership. So if that's something that interests you, be sure to check out the Patreon link in the description section of this video.
Are only beginning, just barely starting to understand the problems with living in a therapeutic culture, a culture where everyone is encouraged to constantly think about themselves and their own emotional states and be going to therapy and be taking medicine and everything all the time. A society where the human condition has been categorized and medicalized and diagnosed. I think people are starting to see the issues with it. Now, I've been talking about this problem for years. Mostly I've been ignored.
I think you mostly should be ignored, honestly. I don't know. Maybe, like I said, maybe you and I will agree on this. But on the vast preponderance of issues, I do think ignoring you is the right thing to do. Not that I've done that. Clearly, I have paid way too much attention.
But I think in the coming years, people will increasingly wake up to this. Mm-hmm. And they will see that we have just entirely handed our culture, our country, ourselves, our humanity over to the psychiatric industry.
Do the people who listen to Matt Walsh talk just not ever critically evaluate what he says? Like, how bereft of criticism do you have to be to hear a man say that we have handed the entirety of our society over to the psychiatric industry and just be like, yep? Like, how do you not pause, reflect on that statement and go like, that's not true. That's clearly not true. I mean, there are tons of people who either have no respect for psychiatry or have some crazy alternative to psychiatry or like have like no psychiatric sort of awareness whatsoever. That's all over the place. And even within psychiatry, there's all these different schools of thought because it's not a hard science. I mean, whatever you want to fucking say about it, I don't think it's without merit, but it's not a hard science for the most part. There are facts about psychiatry, but broadly speaking, a lot of it is freaking guesswork and a lot of it is constantly evolving. And I guess that's like sort of true of every science, but there's a lot more sort of like, here's my theory. Well, here's my theory. Well, I've done this study and I've done this research that shows this. Well, my research actually shows this. And there's all these little variables and there's all this little nuance. And so even within the field itself, wild sort of differing viewpoints and ideas about what's the right thing to do in any given situation. Wild different ideas about how to address this variable or that variable, or how these two sort of mental states might be at odds with each other, or might have some sort of comorbidity, or how this personality type might, you know, interact in this situation, and what should they do in that situation instead. And, you know, all these things that, you know, are wildly different. And then you have, like I said, these alternatives to psychiatry, where it's like we reject all of psychiatry and instead we draw from, you know, a religious tradition or a political tradition or whatever. And then some might incorporate certain elements of psychiatry, or they might mix psychiatry with pseudoscience, or they might mix psychiatry with religion, or they might mix psychiatry with politics, like Jordan Peterson. And so there's all of these different things. And, you know, so this idea that like society in general, like for what he said to be true, none of what I just said could be true. There would have to be one unified psychiatric orthodoxy, and it would have to be like mandatorily adhered to by literally everyone. And that is not even close to being reality. That is so insanely far from reality, it's not even funny. So I don't know what the hell this guy's talking about. I don't know what kind of crack he is smoking, but what he's just said is nonsense.
Which means that over time, people will see that the issues stretch far beyond what the New York Times has been talking about. What we've done, you know, focusing just on young people for a moment, what we've done is we have programmed them to look inwards, always. So like they don't see the outside world.
The idea of self-reflection and introversion predates the idea of psychiatry. The idea of that being prescribed for dealing with issues predates psychiatry. How are you going to take a stance against introspection and reflection? Like, because that's a separate issue from what you were just talking about. Like, I can actually see some merit in the idea that we should not over-medicalize the human condition. I actually think that's the closest thing to a good point I've ever heard you make. But you're not even expounding on that. You've totally changed course to now you're just like rallying against the concept of introspection.
Back at themselves, thinking about
by the way.
themselves, thinking about how they're feeling, thinking about how they feel about how they feel, and how they feel about how they feel about how they feel. It creates this like infinite regress of self-obsession, and they can't get out of their own heads.
I'm not going to listen to a lecture about self-obsession from Matt Walsh, a guy who clearly would suck his own cock if he could, okay? And I mean, I don't even mean like suck his own cock, like, you know, like the flexibility thing. I mean, like if he could clone himself and then fuck himself, he would do it. And we all know he would. So we're not going to take the ego lecture from you, Matt. Like, you're too self-obsessed, as you are talking to me on the Matt Walsh show with the Matt Walsh logo doing its little dance in the background and pretending you're a freaking psychiatric professional and shit, you know, and like qualified to like speak on these matters in an authoritative way. Like, don't fucking come to me within the context of all that and be like, everyone's just too self-obsessed now, you know? Too self-obsessed, not like me, Matt Walsh, the great Matt Walsh, who knows everything, who is a genius. Yes, that's right. It is I, Matt Walsh, the humble Matt Walsh.
In the past, if you had said that, oh, that person can't get out of their own head, you might have meant it in the sense that like their head's in the clouds. And this is someone who's, say, very philosophically minded, very intellectual person.
Excuse me.
Someone that can't get out of his own head because
you wouldn't do your clone. I'm not claiming to be humble. I mean, I'm doing a lot of the same stuff I just said he does, okay? I am also authoritatively trying to speak on matters that are well beyond my purview. And I mean, it says King TJ down there, okay? But the difference is I'm not pretending to be humble. I'm not criticizing others for not being humble because I am not humble.
Constantly contemplating the mysteries of the universe, or he's thinking about the nature of consciousness and where it comes from, and that sort of thing. There's that sense in which a person can't.
Okay. So let's be fair to Matt Walsh. Are there instances where a person can become too self-obsessed to the point where they sort of narcissistically go round and round in circles of their mind? And it's like Narcissus, right? The literal basis of the term narcissism. What is he doing? He is staring at his own reflection forever. And someone made a great point about the story of Narcissus. He's not obsessed with his own beauty, because that would fade pretty quickly sitting there doing nothing and just staring into a pool. I mean, he watches himself as he's withering away and dying. It's not because he's obsessed with how beautiful he is. It's just because he's obsessed with himself. That's Narcissus. That's the basis of the term narcissism, right? And can someone go far too far down that path of self-obsession and just to the point where they basically are doing the equivalent of staring at their own reflection forever in like dreamy contemplation of everything them? Yes, that can go too far. Definitely, that sort of navel gazing stuff can definitely go a little bit too far. Does modern day psychiatry create or influence that? Maybe a little. But this idea like that definitively is like, that's the fucking cause. I mean, like, let's remember the story of Narcissus is pretty old, right? The story of Narcissus is ancient, in fact. You want to know why? Because people like Narcissus have always been with us long before the advent of modern psychiatry, and not everyone who becomes sort of introspective about mental illness becomes a narcissist. I think, in fact, most don't. There's a lot of stuff being sneakily conflated with other stuff. Because let's remember that the contention of the original article was that teenagers, when you make them hyper aware of diagnoses of depression and anxiety, might start to use the ideas of depression and anxiety to avoid things that they shouldn't avoid. That was the contention of the article this all started with. And we've gotten pretty far away from that at this point. Now, I'm not saying that Matt Walsh, as a content creator, as whatever he considers himself, philosopher, intellectual commentator, whatever, I don't know what terms he uses for his own shit. I would call him, like, I don't know, a bloviator, a rambler, but whatever. I'll respect his own terms for himself. The point is that I'm not saying he's not allowed to get away from that, but he should make it clear that's what he's doing. I feel like he's not making it clear, hey, I have changed the subject several times over since we were talking about that a moment ago. He's acting like he's still on the same subject, and he's not. He's changed the subject quite a few times now.
And the thing is, say what you want about that kind of mentality. It's obviously much better for the individual and for humanity than this sense of not being able to get out of your own head, which is that we've got all these young people and older people who are trapped in their own heads not because they're thinking about something beyond themselves and they're contemplating mysteries of the universe, and not because they're too intellectual and not practical enough, but because they're just bundles of emotion. And they're always thinking about it. All of their attention is turned back within themselves.
Like, at this point, he might as well have just invented someone to be mad about, right? Because this is so far afield from where we started.
That you've got young people that don't understand that suffering and discomfort, anxiety, sadness, these are all normal. This is all part of being human, and you will never escape them. You just won't.
I mean, the thing is, that's just kind of a lesson that has to be learned over time. I don't even disagree, but like acting like therapy created this condition. I mean, like, the young are never going to be wise. That's the thing. Like, you can't expect wisdom from the youth. They don't have the things that you can derive wisdom from. I don't know who it was who said it, but there was like an idea that there's like 3 paths to wisdom. There is the experience path, like the whole Paul thing, right? Which is the bitter path to wisdom. And then there is the emulation of other wisdom, which is like the easy way to do it. You just look at what other wise people have said, start saying similar shit. Bam, you're fucking wise. It's the easiest way. And then the third way to wisdom is through self-reflection, which is a thing that seems to be rallied against here. I don't think that you should discourage people from being introspective. I don't think you should discourage people from being reflective about themselves, because like the very lesson that you want these young people to learn, that pain and suffering are just things that exist in life that we all have to learn how to cope with and deal with. That sort of revelation is something that comes to you through self-reflection or through experience or through learned wisdom. However you learn it, it takes time to fucking learn. And like I mean, with all due respect to the original author of that article, we don't really know long-term what this therapy is doing for these kids. Yeah, maybe in their youth, it gives them like a little excuse, like, oh, I don't have to do it because I'm anxious. I don't have to do it because I'm depressed. Maybe it does it for then, but maybe it blossoms into something else in their 20s or 30s. So like to just say like, oh, this is failing, maybe it is. I don't know. But it's kind of early to say that. And also like maybe the solution is to make adjustments to it. Or maybe the solution is to include language about like, hey, just because you have this diagnosis doesn't mean you can be a little bitch. That doesn't mean you can just crawl into a ball and be like, well, I'm depressed, so I guess I'll just... Like maybe that sort of stuff needs to be included in these programs. Like, hey, you still have to be proactive and try to find solutions to problems. This is not an excuse to not do that. Or maybe we need to be more careful about who's put into the program. Maybe we need to look at different criteria. There's 1,000,001 things that could be done. But to take like, hey, this school program is not having the results we want and extrapolating that to like the very concept of self-reflection is artifice. And really, like, you know, people should only contemplate external things beyond themselves. And people should not be all emotionally aware and stuff because that's just like crybaby, sissy bullshit. And I don't know. I mean, it just seems like simplistic. And to be honest with you, it seems also very cowardly. Like the idea that our emotions, like the things that are within us, are so like scary and depressing and bleak that like we shouldn't even look within, we should only look without. I mean, it kind of explains a lot of things in the Matt Walsh mentality, I guess, but I don't think it's good for us as a species. And I'm pretty sure that it's not wisdom either. It's not intelligence. It's not wisdom. It's basically just the glorification of ignorance, which is about what I'd fucking expect from you, Matt.
And you might say, well, that's not fair. So you're telling me that I will always have suffering and that there'll always be pain and sadness in my life, no matter what I do? Yeah. That's human existence. That's what human existence entails. Anxiety, especially. It's why I'm always talking about the fact that we turned anxiety into a disease is so insane. And I know that most people still are not far enough along here to. This is. I'm going too far for most people.
Yeah, you're blowing my mind with your brilliance right now.
People that track me up till now, when I suggest that anxiety is not at all a mental illness, that's what. Well, no, that's not true. I have anxiety. It's different for me. You don't understand. I need medicine. My anxiety is different from yours. It's so much worse. How do you know that?
Because I have a family member who used to say the exact same thing as you. Anxiety, anxiety, fuck a bunch of bullshit, bunch of crybaby horse shit, anxiety. Everybody's got anxiety. That's part of the human condition. Exactly same line of rhetoric you're saying now. Lo and behold, times got a little worse for this person. they became a little bit less secure in their health. They became a little bit more aware of their mortality. And they started experiencing anxiety. And you know what their tune changed to? Well, I guess this anxiety shit is real, huh? I mean, this is one of the things I hate most about right-wing mentalities, is that they never learn the lesson until it fucking smacks them in the face. And one of the reasons they don't ever learn the lesson until it smacks them in the face is precisely because they're not self-reflective. They don't actually contemplate anything internally. They don't introspect at all. They don't question themselves. They don't interrogate themselves. They don't ask what their true intentions are. They don't have any sense of their own character beyond just some flowery notion of like, I'm the good guy and I'm the tough dude. Nah, nah, nah. And it's all very primitive and it's all very stupid. And Matt Walsh sucks fucking monkey butts for a living. And I don't know, maybe he'll fucking be halfway tolerable when he's 97 years old and he barely can think anymore. And maybe he'll have learned like at least 3 things by then. But anyway, how about I expose Matt Walsh to some intense trauma and see if he knows what anxiety is after that? I mean, as big of a hypocrite as Matt Walsh is, I wouldn't be surprised if there was anxiety medication in his fucking cabinet right now, okay? Like, it doesn't matter. Even if he personally did believe in anxiety, if he thought that what his audience wanted to hear was the opposite, he would say it because that's who he is.